Hi, I'm Jim Clark, Visual Arts Manager here at Hopkins Center for the Arts. Today we're speaking with Russell Hamilton about his exhibition, An Empirical Voice, on view now through June 21st, 2025 in the Retta Penning Gallery. Russell, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Yeah. Can you tell us about the specific inspirations for this body of work?
Yeah, so I don't know if some of you saw the original title for the work. It was based off of a book called Voices from an Empire, which is a book my father wrote in 1975, published by the University of Minnesota, examining kind of the Luso African literature coming out of the former colonies of Portugal. I use that title as kind of a reference to the experiences I had in traveling. So I traveled quite a bit through my father's research on different sabbaticals, and those experiences kind of shaped who I am today and how I go about with my own voice. There were some issues with me using the title from family members about using the title of my father's book that had nothing to do with what his book was about, so I ended up actually kind of changing to An Empirical Voice. We all know the empirical is the idea of experience and having that kind of thing, so that's kind of where the change in the name came. But the work is really, this has been 12 months of work. Some pieces came together very quickly. Some actually, I think, still quite aren't finished yet, but I think this piece is not quite finished for me. But so the body of work kind of touches on some of my experiences with my own culture, my history in terms of my travels, some of the ideas I have about being an American, which are positive, of course, and things of that nature. So that's kind of the body of work that I'm discussing here in some of these work, plus some of the things you see that has some of the Arabic language in it. I spent quite a few years living in the UAE, in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, about 18 years living there. So I spoke Arabic, and that came into influence as well in terms of my own voice. And I also like the idea of calligraphy as an image too. Yeah, that's kind of the sum of the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Luso African is a term. Can you explain that term?
Yeah, well, it's a term that I don't want to go into because it's not
For
about
sure.
the work anymore.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
I think what happened was in the reference to, I think it was published, that it said the work was based on those issues.
Right.
And it wasn't. I was just pulling the title from my father's book as a way to kind of honor him for the experiences. And I think it was misunderstood a little bit that I wasn't trying to reference the ideas of what those writers went through.
Sure.
They were mostly African writers who were oppressed and not having a voice. So my parents went through a lot to get some of those texts out of the country and back to Portugal where they were published. So, I mean, that's kind of the origin of the title of the work, of my father's work, yeah.
Sure. But what I hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, that those writers were at the intersection of multiculturalism.
Yes.
And you have your own experiences being at the intersection of multiculturalism, and living in the UAE and working there.
And that's one of the reasons I chose that title in a way, because it referenced my own personal experiences outside of my travel with my family, but also my own personal travels.
Yeah.
Which I wouldn't have done had I not had the opportunity as a young person to travel, so, yeah.
Can you say or point out instances of how that travel as a young person influenced the way you see the world and how it's referenced here in this work?
Yeah, I think probably one of the biggest things I think is tolerance and understanding, and having that experience of meeting people from a different culture than I came from, and different languages, different religions, different experiences. That made me more of a accepting and tolerant person, But at the same time, I have a series of work that I'm working on now called I'm Migrant, which is basically immigrant, but hyphened. About what it means to be a traveler and a resident at the same time. When I traveled and lived abroad, I was a resident, but I was still a visitor. You know what I mean? So I was I was as like a home away from home. And oftentimes I was accepted. Sometimes there's certain areas you cannot enter into because you're an American or you come off from a different culture. So those were experiences that I had. So I think that reference is there in the work. I kind of speak about those things in terms of my own personal experience traveling and being the other, but then coming home and also sometimes being the other at the same time. You know, like I was told once to go back to where I came from. And I was like, wow, I'm from Connecticut. I don't think I'm going back there. But yeah, so that's the idea, these ideas about what it means to be a resident traveler, what it means to be home, what it means to be accepted, what it means to be, like you said before, about my idea of tolerance for people and experiencing it.
In 18 years abroad, did you get to a point where you felt like that was home?
Yes, yeah. I think I had not planned on returning to the U.S. actually. I thought I was going to stay my time there and then maybe retire in Indonesia. My wife's from Indonesia, so we have property in place there in an island next to Bali called Lombok Island. So I thought I would go from UAE to Lombok and that would be it. And due to some family issues here, and also I traveled back to, I don't know if you're familiar with Skowhegan School of Art out in Maine. Skowhegan School, the artist residency program. They do like a 9-week summer residency for emerging artists. I was there back in 1990. I'm dating myself. And they had an opportunity to come back as an alumnus. So I applied for it and I got it, and they flew me back from the UAE I came to Minneapolis to see my mother, and then I went to Maine. And I ended up coming back to Minneapolis and deciding that it was time maybe to stay due to issues with my family, my mother and her health, and some issues. So my family stayed over there, then they came over in 2022. I came back in 2021. So it was, my kids did not want to leave because they were born in the UAE, they were in school, all their friends were there, so it was very hard to make that transition back here. So it's kind of, even for me it was difficult because it's kind of a culture shock, you know. But yeah, it did feel like it was home for me. But I still knew that I'm not at home, you know what I mean? Yeah. You're there, but you're not a citizen, you're just a visitor. You can't ever be a citizen in that country. Yeah, they don't give citizenship out.
Wow. My
kids were born there, they don't have citizenship there. Yeah.
That's fascinating. In a way, it feels like that's maybe the viewer looking at your work as well. Because it's not illustrative in the way that it's telling this overtly. It embodies it. And so from my experience, for instance, which I think maybe is representative of some other viewers, we'll say it's kind of quote unquote hard to know what to make of it. You know, and I think viewers oftentimes when they don't understand what they're looking at, they'll say, well, I don't know what to make of it, right? And there's a discomfort there where they walk away. But for me, that's a wonderful thing because it's an opening for me to construct, right? Yeah. You leave clues, and I'm still, it's been up for weeks, and I'm still personally coming to terms with what is this saying? There's a piece that holds a letter.
Yes.
Right.
Letter to Home, the piece is called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it has the screen over the letter, so we understand that there's communication there, but it's obscured.
You can't see it, yeah.
And the works, which are rich with texture and color, they invite us in for that and catch us so that we're continuing to be engaged, because it feels like they're all kind of representations of that letter with a screen. And so
interesting.
It's an oblique missive.
Yeah.
Does that Is that fair?
I think that's very fair. My whole point in being someone who creates works for people to look at is to raise questions. I don't try to give answers. I try to raise questions. And half the time, I'm still understanding what that is myself. That's the process. I love most about creating is the process. For me, it's all about the process. The end result, it's okay. I'm ready to move on. But for me, it's about the process of what I'm doing, what I'm trying to say. Sometimes it's discovered, I have an idea, it's discovered in the process. Furthermore, and things pop up that I hadn't planned. It just kind of comes. And I work on maybe 3 or 4 at one time. I keep that segue between different works. And sometimes those questions will come up. And I want people to come there and say, and go home and think about it.
Yeah.
I don't want to give you the answers. I want to raise questions. And everyone comes to work with their own information and their own experiences. And that allows people to kind of understand what they want. I'm not trying to hit you over the head with anything. Yeah.
In best case scenario for you, what do you hope that the viewer takes away? Like, do you envision or concern yourself at all with what you would hope that the viewer gets, or do you make purely for yourself and then completely give it up?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think it's both of the same coin. That's a good question in a way, because I like to just express myself as I see fit. And whether people enjoy it or not, it's important in a way, but not really the ultimate goal. I'm concerned about my thoughts in the process, but I'm also concerned about aesthetics. I like making things that are enjoyable to look at as well as to engage with on an intellectual level. You have to have that aesthetic element as well. But I want people to question what's going on, to come back. For me, the most powerful work is I look at it and I'm like, wow, what's this, what's that? Not only material-wise, but what the person's talking about. If I can leave that work and I want to go back and see it again, that's a good piece of work. In fact, I was talking to someone just today. There's a woman back here who came in. She said, "This is my second time here."
Yeah.
And I wanted to come back. I was still thinking about your work, and that to me is the best compliment I could ever have. If someone says to me, "I went home and I was thinking about your work again. I have these things and questions." And I'm not the one to necessarily to give those answers. That's up for the individual. So people who witness the work, they come with their own sets of experiences, and they have to answer those questions themselves.
The work is rich in texture and materiality. You're mixing mediums freely and fluently. How do you make your decisions about medium and material?
I was trained as a three-dimensional person. I was trained as a sculptor. And I moved to assemblage work. I started out very young as a painter and went into sculptural work. I made clothes, I sew, I write. So all those kinds of things have come together now in some of the most recent work. When I'm working two-dimensionally, but I love to play with fabric, and I love to play with cutouts. I love to do collage work. And I'm trying to bring that across back into the sculptural work as well now, back and forth. So that's kind of my choice of materials, are just whatever I have. I like to also upcycle and reuse materials. I'm not someone who goes out and buys a pre-made canvas, from the store. I've never done that. You see a lot of the work this has got paper, fabric. I had some pieces with cardboard in them. I use old stuff from sewing, the patterns that I get from Vogue and Simplicity and Butternick from the 70s and 80s that I've been collecting and got from family. So I really enjoy the materiality of things and with my hands. That's really important for me. Yeah.
There are many stamps in the show. And
yes.
I counted stamps from the US, from Russia, from Brazil, from Portugal, from Canada. In many ways, they read as letters that are in a language that we don't understand, but we can enjoy for their visual elements.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. Or they might be homophones or a word that we recognize out of context.
Or an image that you see. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The stamps, are they actually stamps or reproductions?
No,
of
they're
stamps?
actual stamps. Yeah. I started collecting stamps when I was probably about 9 or 10 years old. And everywhere I traveled, I would collect stamps, and I would, back then, as we all know, we used to actually write letters, so we use stamps. Nowadays, people just send emails. But I've got thousands of stamps in my collection. There are some that I will never use that are really quite amazing, that come from some areas of Africa, and they were political because the people were actually assassinated, so I've kept those stamps. Mm-hmm. But everything else I have, like I said, I like to use them in the work. Sure. And they represent that whole idea of my travels again, and where I've been and how those have influenced me. Yeah.
Is there any sense of sacrifice when you commit a stamp to a work? Or does it feel like squeezing out a tube of paint? It just is in service of your expression.
Yeah, it's in service of my expression. Yeah. That's why I have a book of stamps that I will probably never use. But who knows? Maybe I will at some point. Sure. But those stamps I will not touch because there's things that they have other value to me that I'm keeping them. Mm-hmm. But then again, I'm thinking, well, what am I keeping them for? Yeah. You know what I mean? So perhaps one day they'll end up in some work. But right now, I've got, like I said, I've got so many stamps to use still. They are like a piece of fabric to me. I'll just use them as appropriately needed in a particular work. And I have them all categorized. I have by continent, actually. I have all the stamps organized in terms of their continent. Yeah.
You said that this bodywork represents about 12 months, about a year, did you say?
Yeah, about 13 months probably I started, yeah.
And how does it relate to your other work? Is this very representational, or is this a departure?
I think it's a slight departure because prior to that, it was mostly sculptural work. Mm-hmm. So mostly 3D work like this work. In this scale. I like working in that scale. And I've worked larger pieces as well, and done a lot of public artwork as well. Had a piece recently out in Edina. I've done public sculpture in Japan and other places. So this is a departure in a way, the two-dimensional work. Probably like the last 2 years, I started this more two-dimensional focus in my work. Yeah.
In process-wise, do you have? Does a visual idea come to you from the cosmos, or do you write an idea out, or do you just immediately work in the materials and see how it goes?
Probably all three. I have an idea of something I want to talk about, and I write notes to myself. I like writing, so I have sketchbooks where sketchbooks probably have as much writing as they do imagery. Things that I'm thinking about, I put those up on the studio wall when I'm working. I sometimes do small sketches of things, ideas, like a layout. Like I did small sketches of some of these larger pieces.
Thumbnail kind of?
Yeah. No, maybe like this size, 6 by 7, whatever. It's just kind of a sketch of an idea. But the thing, I'm not someone who likes to be, how do I say this, I don't draw something out and then do it like a coloring book. Mm-hmm. So I never start, whatever I start is never where I finish. Mm-hmm. I'm of the belief is that if I know where I'm going, I don't want to go there. You know what I mean? So I never draw something out and then I just fill in the color. Mm-hmm. And that never happens. So if you could have seen this painting when it started, it's a completely different painting. The only thing that's probably the same is the tree. That started from my original drawing. It had huge mountains and stuff and like that, but it's a process. So over time, as I work on things, I take things out, I add things in. Mm-hmm. I have references of text that I might want to use. I have materials laid out, like I have fabrics and newspapers that I want to use, and I kind of bring those in as I see fit.
Sure.
Yeah. That's why it's important for me to work on more than one piece at a time, because something might work in that piece, but it didn't work over here, so I can take it from this and put it on that piece. if it's in the same context.
How often does something not work out?
All the time.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of that's why it's a process. So it's not working out. I'm not, it's not happening. What's going on? I think that's also maybe my own strict lens. You know how we all are about our own work, right? It's like, it's not good. It's terrible, and then it kind of clicks for a way. I think that's something that happens often. I have to be careful, being pleased with my stuff. There's that line of the ego, right? We have.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's great. No, it's like, so that's the challenge. Yeah. But often things don't. I think I like the challenge of resolving something that's not working. Yeah. And usually it's not working on an aesthetic level, even though I've got information that I want to get going. Maybe aesthetically it's not quite there.
Sure.
It's not working for me visually, and I'm very formal in a way too. I look at things very formally, how things work on a 2D surface, the relationships of elements in the space and color, and all those things are very important to me still. Yeah.
Do you try to have an equal balance between the content and the form? Or if one were to win out on a particular piece, what would it be?
Like I said, I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the elements of aesthetics, and that's really important to me, that things are intriguing and enjoyable to look at, and that's a big element in my work. I want you to be engaged by it visually, as well as and the content, like I said before, it's my content. You're going to come with your own stuff. You might see something completely different. So I feel like that's constantly getting that in there, but how are you reacting to it visually?
Sure.
Because if it's not visual, it's not going to engage you, it's not going to hold you, you're not going to have questions about it. So it's got to have that element visually as well. Yeah. So that's a pretty important aspect to the work.
You mentioned, it seems like fair game, that you felt like this one maybe isn't done.
Yeah, it's not done. It's not.
How do you know? I know a lot of folks here, practicing artists themselves.
Yeah, I know you all are
big
practicing.
Question, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it? When
is it done for you?
I think it's done when I feel like there's certain things I have, when I've resolved everything visually, things I left out. This one I feel it's still some work that I want to do on it that I just didn't have time before this exhibition. And I've been working on that one probably the longest. That's probably the piece that I've worked on the longest of all the pieces is this one. Yeah. I don't know if it's because of the scale of the piece or just, because it went through so many iterations, so many transformations. So it actually started to click probably a month ago. I felt like, it's coming together now. Yeah. So I needed maybe another month or two or three. But it's a good question about when something feels finished, Yeah. And I'm okay. I mean, that's why it's nice to have an opportunity to have an exhibit for your work, because then you're forced to have that cutoff point. You're forced to say, okay, I'm done working on it because I have to get it to this exhibition. If there was no exhibition, you'll just keep working on things perhaps, so.
Do you find that to be the case when you don't have the hard deadline that you will tweak?
I tweak, I find that out now. Yeah. Like I've got a show coming up. I've got a solo show in Chicago in February 2026. So I'm starting that work now, and I have that deadline, which is really important for me to know that I've got this deadline. I've got to get the work done, and they want 12 pieces, 12 new pieces for the show. So that's what I'm working on now, and so it's good to have that deadline.
Sure.
Yeah.
Will that work look much like this, or is it significantly different?
That's a great question. Throughout my time as an artist, people have come to me and say, why didn't you do that work you did? I tend to do things one and done. So I've done a body of work and I don't revisit it. I've left it. I go to something completely different. And I've been told by people that you should stay with that. You should keep doing that. That's strong. I don't know why I can't do that. I have to try something different and new. Yeah. But actually for the show in Chicago, I'm picking up off of what I finished with this piece. So I'm trying to continue in a vein where I'm playing with some new materials in a way. I'm using more wax and other stuff like that. I'm getting into printmaking now. I'm working with Josh over at the Hopkins Center. I've got a little residency with him, fellowship that I got. So I'll be adding elements of printmaking into my work. That's kind of new for me.
Yeah.
I experimented with it earlier and it didn't really work, but now I'm going to be doing some block printing and layering and bringing those elements into the work. So doing it on paper, doing it on homemade paper, and then adding it to the work. So that's the next direction.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Josh and High Point are great.
Yeah, they are fantastic. Yeah. It's a great facility too over there.
Totally.
Yeah.
Let's open it up to questions.
Sure.
How does that sound?
How do you transform some wisp of inspiration into an actionable piece that you're going to start working on? How do you make that transition from something goes floating past and you go, well, that's interesting?
What I think I do is I take those things that come to me, and like I said, I do a lot of writing. I like to write a lot of notes, and then I do some sketches. I like to also look at work. So I'm influenced by lots of different artists around the world. I look at things, I'm influenced by so many visuals that I tend to like, okay, this is what I'm thinking about. This body of work was about the particular subject matter. I started to work with materials right away. And that's why I don't always know where I'm going with the work. So I kind of have an idea, I put it down, I start cutting out stuff. I say, okay, what's the scale of the work? So I do that first, and then I start adding material. So for this piece, I knew I wanted a large piece. I got the canvases, I cut them, I brought paper together, I sewed them together, and I said, okay, that's the scale I'm working on. What are my elements now? I knew my elements. I started bringing those into play, and I tend to have I see that my color palette is pretty much kind of, they're similar, isn't it? The use of colors are similar right now. And that may change. Right now, I like greens and blues and browns and golds. Those are my colors. They're kind of natural colors. So those are really in the work a lot. And I love fabric. I love patterns and this kind of thing. So I'm bringing actually more pattern into my work as I'm working on the new stuff now. Hope that kind of answers your question. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm really enchanted by the fabric elements and the open stitch work, and it's just making me wonder about your process a little bit more. Do you work on like a flat surface, like you would if you were sewing, or
I do.
Are you doing both, or
I
what is
do
the
both.
percentage that you put things up on a wall versus like work on a flat surface?
So what I do is I start out small because I don't have a quilting sewing machine. I've got like 4 sewing machines, but they're all short arm sewing machines. So as you know, it's difficult to get into the center of things. So I have to work piecemeal. So that I often start small. That piece over there with the 2 figures on it, that started out as just the head with the white mask. It was this big. That's where I started with that piece. And then the letters came, the voice text came. And then it was just that piece this way where the 2 figures came in. And then it kept moving on. So, and that's part because I have to sew that way. I can't start that big. So those are the processes I kind of go through. And at the same time, like this piece, I painted on this thing on the floor sometimes. Yeah, because I put it on the floor and I walk on it, I step on it. I work barefoot in my studio, so I'm walking on it. Sometimes I actually get paint on my feet and there'll be footprints on the piece, So I do work on it. I hung it upside down and painted it. So I do different things from the floor to the wall, and then I have a big table that I use for sewing. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting a long arm sewing machine. They're quite costly though, but that's the next purchase hopefully.
That's a dream.
Yeah, it is a dream.
You're speaking the language of multiple people.
Yeah. But I was going to ask, and you kind of already answered it, I wondered if the limitations of having just short arm machine was something that you enjoyed the tension of, but it sounds like you do plan to get a long arm to make things easier.
That's a good thought. I'm not sure will it change the way I work.
Yeah.
Because like I mentioned, now I work small and I had to build myself out to the larger. If I have a big sewing machine, maybe it will be a different process.
Right.
I'm able to jump right in. I saw a video of, y'all know Bisa Butler's work, right? I saw a video of her sewing the quilting machine, and she can work on like 5x5 machine and it can just sew right in the middle. I was like, wow, that's really cool, because I want to be able to add things and sew them later. I can't do that necessarily until I have to plan it ahead of time in a smaller kind of succinct way and build upon it. So that constraint, I think, brings some of that element that you're seeing in the work now that could be lost if I had a larger long arm sewing machine. Yeah. But I also sew on the floor too. If I'm stitching, like this piece I can't put on the table, so I had the sewing machine on the floor, and I have a system where I can pull with a rod, and I just kind of sew and I pull that way, you know. So, yeah, little pulleys and things like that help out. Yeah.
Do you use any type of computer-aided design?
There are times where, like, see that piece up there, that figure in the middle, which references that I will do sometimes some things in Photoshop, and then print them out. Yeah.
I'm really curious about the one that you think you don't have done yet.
Yeah.
It looks like, you know, it's two pieces that were merged, but did you have a feeling for the whole thing when you began, or did you start with one side and then the other side developed from that?
It's a good question. This one, unlike that one, which started out with one side, this one actually was done whole. I did the whole thing first. I did sew everything together. I roll up the side and I sewed it all together, so I had it that scale. I knew I wanted to play with this line, this sewing line, and having one side and the other side, two distinct kind of dichotomies of ideas that I was dealing with. So yeah, it was designed as that large. But again, the imagery changed quite a bit. It used to be, actually, this was all mountains. And you can see it still picks up over here. So there was no city in there for a long time. It was just all mountains, and bigger mountains I had here. And there was text that I kept in here that was here. There was a figure hanging from the tree. So there's all these things. Actually, it was sewn in, so I had to pull it apart and tear it out. But all those things were it was already that scale from the beginning, yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
What's with the falling figure?
The title of the work is called The Fall, and it's about, I won't say falling from grace, but in terms of my own individual experiences and my own falls, it's kind of representing that, and how we do fall, but we get back up again, both from a cultural or religious point of view. There's things that we are challenged by and do that we tend to fall down. We're maybe in a constant state of falling, you know? So those are kind of references that the piece is dealing with.
Do you have a read on what it means for you?
Yeah,
I knew a gentleman that had an image of a falling man on his office wall. Do you get a read on? No, I mean,
That was
I put
a
him on the
long
spot.
time
Now
ago.
everybody's going to be afraid to come.
This one's falling. That one's falling, but this one might be like diving. So it might be purposeful, you know? There's purpose in that jump. There's a different jump, not the fall in a way.
Skydiving, maybe.
Perhaps without parachutes, yeah.
Well, it's fun till you land.
What's that? It's fun till you land? Yeah, unless you're landing in the water, but then it's still, the impact is still quite difficult.
I have another question. I don't want to monopolize, but this piece has been getting a lot of attention from these folks, and maybe part of that is just that we're standing in front of it. But has your idea of how complete it is changed this evening?
No, it's still not quite complete for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some things I would like to still tweak on it. I'd like to work on the city some more.
Sure.
Adding some other elements to the city. Perhaps playing with more of the ideas of the windows and light. That's one element I want to deal with. I'm pretty satisfied with the sky in a way, but I might want to play with that some more. And I feel like this idea of this streak and this movement is still undecided for me. So some things I might want to reconsider in there. Those are the things that I was looking at and feeling, yeah.
How often did those feelings come up and then you address them in the next work?
Yeah, that's a good point, because I work on multiple pieces at a time. So I will try something, that piece, you see the letters and text there that came up in this one as well, and also in this one as well. So sometimes I allow myself to bring what didn't work there into another piece. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question, because when you were talking about something before and you were in front of that work, your hands, you were pointing out with your hands, and your hand ended up on a particular place where now that you did that, I keep looking at it and looking at and trying to figure out. And that's the end of that tree branch. There's a little ring up on the cloud or something. And now I just keep looking at that because your hand was there.
Yeah, that's actually the letter C.
Oh, okay.
It's a letter there. So
Okay.
I don't know if you can see the other letters there that
Nope.
I cut out. There's other letters.
Okay.
Come close and see. There's letters here that I cut out and placed it up there. So that area used to be full of text, both cutouts and painted text.
So that's part of it. You're wondering if you want to.
I took it out and just covered it with sky and left that little bit of a C.
Okay.
And that was more of, I think for me personally, an aesthetic thing, because it picked up on these things.
Yeah, I had
And
seen that.
I
yes.
kind of like that visually. So
I
it was
agree.
it was a formal decision in a way. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
What fabrics do you mix in, or is it all canvas, but just different
No,
types?
I've got a large collection of fabrics. I've got a few people that I know who constantly call me and donate. I had a call this morning from someone who had a bunch of zippers for me. And so I use upholstery fabric, I use cotton fabric, I use linen fabric, I use old jeans. This is all this piece down here, this is all jean material, all denim, that I cut up an old pair of jeans. I got my old clothes in there, socks. I have old socks that I use, t-shirts. And so I use a lot of different materials, whatever I can find, yeah.
Do you ever dye them or manipulate them?
I do not dye them yet. I've been thinking about it. What I've been thinking about actually doing is taking fabric and then doing printmaking on them to create my own patterns. That's kind of what I'm looking at doing with over at the print center now. But that's something I'd like to look at. And I'm really interested in handmade paper too now. Something I want to explore and do printing on that. But yeah. But dyeing is something very interesting. I like the idea of dyeing stuff, yeah.
I just had another one. Could we talk about, or could you talk about the one across here, the people all pointing in the same direction? I just think that's a fabulous piece.
Thank you. Yeah, the pointing is kind of directed at this little person, this little creature, which is I'm not sure, it was a monkey at first, and it's kind of a baboon now. Yeah, I mean, the piece is titled, I don't know what all of you think, we all have our own belief system, but it's called An Evolutionary Tall Tale. So it's kind of addressing ideas about what we perceive to be our origin and human origin in a way. Yeah. Very distinct centerpiece, which is about the light. And that's what the Arabic says, coming from darkness into light. That's what the Arabic says. Allahu waladina amanu yukhrijuni dhulumat ila nur, which is coming from darkness to light. Yeah. Hope that answers. Yeah. Thank you. You're welcome.
Russell,
Yes.
thanks so much.
Oh, thank you
for
everybody.
sharing your
Thank you.
work with our community.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you.